All right, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us again. It is my pleasure to welcome Chief Savalas Kidd and Chief Richard Beal to speak with us today on policing with dignity. Chief Kidd is the Executive Director of Public Safety and the Chief of Police at the University of Dayton, and he has over 25 years of law enforcement experience. Before coming to UD, Chief Kidd served 12 years in the Ohio Attorney General's office, where he was an assistant special agent in charge, leading statewide unit operations for crimes against children, cyber crimes, and human trafficking. Chief Beal served nearly 25 years as a member of the Cincinnati division, in the last 6 years of that as the assistant chief of police. In 2004, the chief was appointed as the first executive director of the Community Police Partnering Center in Cincinnati. He has been the chief of police for the Dayton Police Department since 2008, so for 13 years now. Welcome, gentlemen. I'd like to start with the opening question. Why did you become a police officer? And why don't we have you go first, Chief Kidd?
Thank you. And I'm glad to be here. So, growing up as a young man, I have had some positive interaction with several police officers in my neighborhood. And as I grew up, I became a cadet with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, located in Cincinnati, Ohio. As I learned more about the profession, I just began to develop a strong desire to help, to make a difference in my community, make a difference in my township in which I was raised. And I felt that being a police officer was truly a call on my life. So I pursued it. I pursued it as I got older and went to school, went to college, and wanted to live out my dream of becoming a police officer. And so with that, that's what brought me and got me to where I am today.
Thank you so much, Chief Kidd. And what about you, Chief Beal? Why did you become a police officer?
Well, I think mine was a little bit more of an accident of fate. I was supporting myself and putting myself through college, and just happened to, I was working in a department store in Cincinnati. And I got to know the store detectives, and I happened to notice that they were a couple were intently walking down the main aisles of the department store, and I realized something was probably getting ready to happen, and they had a struggle with a shoplifter, and I had taken a course in personal fitness and self-defense at University of Cincinnati. So I helped bring this shoplifter under control and escort him back to the security office, and several months later, one of the detectives went on maternity leave, and they needed somebody to fill in for her, and it paid more. And being a very practical person, he was supporting himself through college. An increase in pay was really helpful at that time, so I just took that job, and something about that line of work just grabbed me and just resonated. So at that point, I began to pursue efforts to become a police officer. I was a nutrition major by training, so if you want to know about a good diet and good food, I can help you out on that. But I did not pursue that career once I graduated, and actually went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base here in Dayton, as first working for the United States Air Force as a civilian, but then got called by University of Cincinnati Police because I had put an application in with them. And so about a year after I was in the Air Force, I was hired by UC Police, then went to Cincinnati Police, and it all went from there. And I will say my mom was the peacemaker in her family. So she was really my role model. So I think I've just kind of done her work and she did in her family and the world. So that's the short version.
So, we're all going to be emailing you after this for nutrition ideas. I mean, I personally, we all could use some help in that department. So, gentlemen, what is it like right now leading police forces with the kind of environment we're in as a country, the kind of conversations happening? What kind of tensions are you and the police you lead facing?
Well, I would say it's particularly a very divisive time in our country, and it's been progressively slow. This is not something that just emerged this year. You can just almost see the tenor of the nation, and particularly in various leadership level. It was just growing and in a fashion that was not leading people to understand we have a shared fate and we have shared values and shared processes in this country, which makes it a great country. And so there's, certainly a very much a divisive environment that's been in the country, escalating over years. And I think this is a time in our country where we really need to decide who we are, whether or not we can live up to the aspirations of all of what democracy and freedom should live up to. So I've lived through various times. I mean, I've been in this field for 42 plus years now. So I've lived through a number of tumultuous times. This one feels more difficult. I don't know if it's just because it's more recent in experience, but it is a tough time to be a police officer, and which means it's even more so these kind of conversations that we're having are so important.
Yeah, I would just echo to the chief's remarks. You know, it's a time where we try to balance the community needs as well as the officers' needs to better serve the community as best as we can to meet the community's needs and expectations. It's a time where there's a large focus internally as we deal with racial equity and equality. There's a strong emphasis in our department. I would say, making sure that our officers are serving with compassion is a principle that we have and a model that we have within our agency, and being mindful, being mindful police officers as we do our job. At the same time, providing a great service, but being a good listener to the community needs. I think Chief Bill mentioned something before as it relates to procedural justice, how not so much what the police does, he said, but he said how the work is being done. So there's an emphasis on how we're doing our work and what areas can we enhance and do better in. So those dialogues are not only within this agency, but among all law enforcement executives currently. So we always are collaborating and trying to do the best that we can as we serve our individuals, communities, and serve communities collectively, because we couldn't do our jobs just one department alone.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. And that, Chief Kidd, that kind of opens up my next question a little bit, which is, what does dignity in policing look like? So you were talking about it matters the way we do it. For both of you, could you answer this question? I know that is something that would be appreciated by many of those who are listening.
So for me, as I think about dignity in policing, and dignity is one of the principles of policing. No matter the socioeconomic status, no matter the cultural differences, race, what have you, we all have dignity. And I really put an emphasis on, when I talk to our officers, that when we engage anyone in our community, to make sure that their dignity is intact when that engagement is complete. That respect and that honor that we serve with needs to be displayed in our performance. Dignity, this is a noble profession, and as we all have heard and said, I don't think we could do what we do if we do not keep one's dignity in mind or at the forefront. Again, as I said, sometimes in relationships, partnerships, if you compromise that, I think that's where things become a little bit more tumultuous and create more issues for our society. So as I mentioned about serving with compassion, we want to serve with dignity and to maintain our our customer base dignity as well.
I think for me, I would say I learned very, very early on when I began working in the inner city in Cincinnati that I needed to meet people where they were at. And that meant that my views about how people should live or what, quote, is an appropriate lifestyle, I had really checked that at the door. Because I found that many people were living many different ways that were quite different than the way I had lived and I was brought up. And I had to meet them at that place and try to understand their lives and what they hoped to achieve, what they really wanted, what they needed in terms of from police. So really was a problem-solving approach, and I tried to provide them options of choices because empowerment is really about an agency that I get some ability to influence, which really comes out of procedural justice too, that I have the ability to influence the processes of policing and the processes of justice itself if I happen to be for a court of law. I have the ability to influence that by being heard and being what I have offered in terms of my explanation information weighed with earnestness before authorities make a decision. So it's really early on, I thought, wow, this is a problem you have. You have a problem with your neighbor, some property was damaged. What are the options here? And I kind of lay out options. So I really learned so much as a young police officer about putting in check what I thought how the world should be, because I found it was much different than I ever thought it was. And so there was a real learning curve for me early on.
I'll just say to the audience, if you guys want to be sending in your questions as we are going, we can answer those for you. One of the questions is, what are the positions of the chiefs? I'm assuming you mean that they're police chiefs. I don't know if any other positions could be answered in that question. Do either of you understand that question if I'm saying it wrongly?
Maybe I don't know if it's a question of our position related to your topic, which is one of immigration, which is
maybe go that way.
I have worked on for well over a decade, and it was not the journey I thought I'd be taking. When I first came to Dayton, it was less than a month having arrived as chief. They got an email from an advocate in our East Dayton community saying that members of the Hispanic Latino community felt terrorized by Dayton police if they were being hunted. And I thought, wow, this can't be true. It just can't be true. And so I began diving into that issue and actually looking at arrest data. And we actually had to go by hand because oftentimes at jail intake, the ethnicity was not being recorded. So we weren't sure without looking literally by name and face and data that's entered into the jail system, what is the ethnicity of the individuals who are being arrested, because that was the key to find out. And what we found out is that there were very, very few arrests of Hispanic Latino members of the community, but an often consequence of that was deportation, which left families separated, families divided, and often the dependents left behind to be supported by social service agencies. And I said, this can't be what a just society produces. And even looking at the arrest data, I found it was often for traffic offenses, even sometimes more so than criminal, and that didn't make sense to me. So we had to wind up changing our arrest policy for traffic violations. They said if it was for no driver's license, don't make a identity problem a jail problem. If you don't know who that person is because you don't have identification, investigate, because I'm going to date myself a little bit now. But when I became a police officer, we had paper driver's license that just had typed information. There was no photo. You had no idea who the person was standing in front of you. So we had to ask questions. We had to get to know them. We had to, where do you live? Who can I call that can verify? Because not certain who you are. So we had to do it the old-fashioned way. We had to get to know people in the community. And so the policy was changed. It said, inquire request other documentations, contact people, because now with cell phones, everybody has a cell phone. It's pretty easy to call somebody who can verify who someone is. So go through those processes, and we're not going to physically arrest someone for no driver's license, particularly for first offenses. There's been no prior within 5 years. And so our arrest for traffic violations plummeted. Now, the greatest beneficiaries of that were white and African-American members of our community, because that was the majority of who were being arrested. But the secondary impact of the individual Hispanic Latino was that if they were undocumented, they were not being deported for, in essence, a traffic offense. And that was my first excursion into the area of local law enforcement, its impact on immigration policy and our immigrant community members. And it's been a long journey of more than a decade of various efforts along the way, including working very closely with the Obama administration through the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force and National Immigration Forum to try to shape federal policy, which has been a mess for a long time. And I'll just say a real quick story. When I told one of the police majors who oversaw our policy development, that after the traffic enforcement policy, I thought I needed to do more on the immigration related issue as it relates to how local law enforcement relates to our immigrant community members. And he said, Chief, why don't you wait till the federal government figures it out? Well, now more than 10 years later, it still hasn't been figured out. So I'm glad I made that choice, and many other things if we had time, we could talk about. But finding ways to work with all community members, in particular as it relates to the potential impact of immigration enforcement, to work with our immigrant community members, to have a relationship with local law enforcement that we were not perceived as or became functional as immigration enforcement agents. So we are very, very clear. I made very clear for all of our personnel what our role was and was not as related to local law enforcement, and that overwhelmingly immigration enforcement is not a responsibility. We don't have the authority, and it potentially undermines our relationship with our community. And so we're not going to do it except in very severe type of crimes will we potentially engage immigration. That's been minimal, not a handful of times that we have done that. So that's a quick story there about position, and at least on our issue of, because your prior session was actually on dignity and immigration laws and policy. So I thought I maybe should just mention that. So if that was a question about position there, that's maybe the answer is part of that for some folks.
I love it. Well, that's enabling me to get to my questions in advance, which is really helpful. And I think what you brought up is a really helpful perspective. I don't think people who really aspire to have law and order realize that if people are going to get deported over traffic offenses, it means a community is less likely to report actual violent crime that endangers all of us, whether we were born here or not. And so I really appreciate you helping your community have trust in the police so that crime can be reported. And that's something that, we don't always connect those dots. And so that's really, really helpful. We've got some questions coming in the chat, and I'll kind of intersperse them with some of the ones here. Right now, people are angry at police officers. What does it look like for people who are angry? I'm just going to go for the hard questions. What does it look like for those who are angry at the police, whether it's over racial equity or immigration and how immigrant communities are engaging with police? What would you recommend to those folks who are having a hard time with the police right now? And then kind of a question came from the chat that's on the back of that. What can we as civilians do to be helpful when it comes to the police and immigration, or police and immigrants, refugees? So those are kind of tied into one. How would you guys address that?
So, it's all about relationship. It's all about partnership. It's all about communication. And again, I'm going back to understanding each other. Sometimes, I say, in order for us to understand, we must first be understood. And that goes, with the community and with the police. I'm the Chief Bill and I, we always welcome dialogue. As it relates to, the tough questions, as it relates to racial equity. I mean, I have a large international population here at the university. And my primary responsibility is keeping this community safe and engaging our international population, and just working with them on how to navigate in this community and this soil, and as they continue to do what they need to do here to be successful here at the university. And I welcome those conversations, and whether that's those are face to face or via Zoom, because it's all about understanding. It's all about, again, compassion and being sympathetic to one another. It's a challenging time for police because we don this uniform, but as anything else, we all are not bad. I mean, and there's a true call, I would say, definitely on my life to serve, and that's what it's really about, and serving one another. And I don't want that component, main ingredient of law enforcement to be lost in the midst of everything that we have going on in this climate, presently. So that's what it's all about. So if the community and individuals would like to provide opportunities for the police, and as much as the police can provide opportunities for members of the community to just have dialogue with one another, listening to understand and not respond, really to try to understand each other, respecting each other's, if there are, and not necessarily if there are any, but respecting differences. And again, serving and meeting people, as Chief Bill said, where they are and where our officers are. Because I do believe in a synergistic environment, that we could do more together collectively as we can as individuals, or as we can as a department. The police, are the community, and the community are the police. I mean, we need to, when individuals look at us, we need to restore justice. We need to be peacekeepers. We need to be a thread of fabric of the community. We all got to work together, holding things together collectively. That's kind of how I see it. Officers that maybe spend time in local parts of their community that they don't spend as much time in, so they can get an understanding, and vice versa. I gained a high degree of policing when I was a cadet, and frankly, when I grew up, I don't know why, but when I saw a police car, I ran away from them. I was terrified. I was scared. I understand. And as I got into the profession, I learned more about the profession. I started to see humanity, and we can't do our jobs today by removing it. So I get it. I think we just need to allow more time with each other to gain a degree of breadth and depth of who we are, and what concerns are each individual have in the community, and let's address those concerns, because concerns are, to me, are just as important as any other crime that's existing in the community, and I don't think they should go unaddressed.
That's really helpful. And so I love that you want to have this dialogue with your community. What would that look like for someone who says, okay, I do want to talk about my concerns with police, or I do want to help and volunteer in some way to aid police? What do? Do they just walk into the police station? Are there productive forums where the community can have those dialogues? What would you guys suggest?
Well, I think community engagement, and this is only has made this environment so much more difficult, but in this era of COVID, look how we're engaging, right? And I have always said, as it relates to, I'm going to borrow the word that Chief Kidd mentioned, relationship, there's no substitute for presence. So at some point in time, we really need to be able to meet each other in physical space, face to face, and have some difficult conversations. And I think the first part of that is to, whatever we think we know about an individual, an occupation, a police agency, a city, a neighborhood, we need to suspend that, because I can really pretty much guarantee that all of us are dealing with an incomplete view of the world, every part of it. And so we should have endless curiosity to try to, again, borrow the word Chief Kidd mentioned, to understand. And we don't understand if we don't accept and take and are willing to consider new information. And that dialogue is important, but I also think at some point we learn so much more about each other and shift attitudes when we work together, that we really put whatever it is that we think is a conflict or a disconnection, we put that on the side, and what are we willing to engage on? What problem in our neighborhood, what condition, even if it's a neighborhood cleanup, what can we do together? And just take this other conversation maybe and put a pause on it, put it off to the side. What can we do together? And it's amazing when people work together towards something, whatever that is, how much attitudes can shift because of that. So I think dialogue can bring us along to a degree if we're willing to suspend our views and take in new information and give it fair consideration. If we walk in with this out with the same attitude we walked in, nothing's really happened. It's an information exchange. I doubt if it's really a dialogue. So I think there's a dialogue that get us part of the way, but working together will get us much further. And a real quick story, in Boston, they had a real crisis of youth homicides in the late 90s. And the ministers were presiding over a funeral of a gang member, and a rival gang member came in. There was a fight emerged, and there was a stabbing occurred. And one of the ministers intervened, trying to protect the person who was being stabbed. And he said there was an epiphany, that we realized that if we weren't willing to go out in the street and do God's work, that God was going to bring it to our doorstep. He said also, we also moved past prayer and protest to partnership and prosperity. We realize we need the police and the police need us. Now, we're not going to tolerate unethical, improper criminal policing. We're not going to accept bad police, but we are going to work with police because we realize we have a shared fate. That was a huge shift in consciousness that happened within 10-point coalition was formed in Boston, and there was a record decline in homicides and youth homicides in particular when people work together on a very difficult issue of gun crime. So a very short story of what that looks like, from prayer and protest to dialogue, partnership, and prosperity.
Chief Beal, Chief Kidd, I think that is a great note for us to end on. Honestly, I could probably interview you guys for the next 2 hours, and we still have questions coming through the dialogue. We'll figure out how to answer those questions in the future, maybe get some more spotlights on you guys. But genuinely, thank you both for taking time from your busy jobs and all that you guys juggle to speak with us today. Dignity in policing, it's such an important topic, as well as just as you guys have been able to draw, it's really about giving dignity to one another by listening in all of our conversations as we think about immigration policies, as we treat each other with equity, as we dig up the areas we don't do that. So really appreciate you guys and what you've shared today.